There's three components to this whole formula, and each one of them really represents how quickly are you turning over money held or bought into cash.
If they have trouble getting cash, it could signal problems down the horizon. It could maybe not ruin the investment, but make your investment perform worse that you maybe weren't expecting.
These are some of the ways that sometimes companies can use to manipulate things. All right, folks, welcome to Investing for Beginners podcast. Today, we're going to talk about some accounting. And don't worry, it's not going to be boring. We're going to talk about some fun stuff. We're going to talk about cash. Actually, we're going to talk about the cash conversion cycle. This is a method that investors can use to see how quickly a company turns its cash into inventory into cash again. And this is particularly important with companies like Costco, Amazon, or Walmart. So maybe we could start from the top and break down some of the components that we're going to discuss today, like what is cash, what is inventory, some of those things. So maybe you could fill our good listeners in on some of those fun accounting terms.
Yeah, totally. Cash is king, right? As they say. Inventory, I think, is a good one to think about. If you are a Costco, inventory everything they sell. If you are a apparel retailer like Nike, the shoes you sell, all of these things are inventory. And the process, I mean, for us as customers, we kind of see inventory. We kind of see the way I go buy a pair of Nikes, I swipe my credit card. Okay, they must have the cash and that must be it. But there's more to it than just you swiping your credit card and the merchant getting cash. So maybe that helps to understand, like, why do I even care about cash and inventory? Because there are, to your point, depending on industry dynamics and the size of a company and suppliers and vendors and blah, 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 it can change the whole getting inventory to cash, and companies need cash because that's how you stay alive, right? So
Right.
it is important for companies. And if they have trouble getting cash, it could signal problems down the horizon. It could make them have to do costly financing. It can do a lot of things that will maybe not ruin the investment, but make your investment perform worse that you maybe weren't expecting. And sometimes the cash conversion cycle can signal that ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you think about some of the terms that we're going to talk about, like accounts payable, accounts receivable, cost of goods sold, some of those really tell you what's going on. So like you're talking about inventory. Inventory is the stuff that a business sells. And for me, the whole inventory thing is hardwired into my brain and what it really means after working in the restaurant business, because we had to buy inventory to sell to our customers. And the longer it sat on the shelf, the more that money was tied up. And that's where this really can start to play into the whole cash flow idea. The faster you can turn inventory into cash, into sales, you can turn it into cash. And accounts payable is a term that may not be a fun term, but that's the money that a company owes the vendor. So if Walmart buys Nike shoes, I don't believe they sell Nike shoes, but let's just say, for example, they buy Nike shoes and stock them on their shelves. Now they owe Nike money. And so the difference between inventory and accounts payable is cash on the shelf and when they pay. So the sooner they can sell those shoes, the sooner they can pay off Nike for the shoes that they bought. What are your thoughts on accounts receivable? Like, how does that play into all this?
Depending on the business, B2B, maybe you'll see this more so. If payment terms, again, we think in the B2C world, we're buying stuff at stores. But if you are receiving services from another business or being the business who's performing those services, the payment isn't always instantaneous. And so there can be the net 30, net 60, net 90, whatever terms they are for a particular transaction. And that's actually something that can become a risk in very tight situations. So we saw some of that in the great financial crisis. This technology company might owe me money. If they go belly up, though, I might not get all of it. And so I provided services for something that I'm not getting paid for. That's something that's a risk that a lot of these companies have to manage. And you'll see them disclose it when the risks maybe could be a little more extreme. Maybe we have 3 customers and those 3 customers make up all of our accounts receivable. That that can be tough. Sometimes the business world can get ugly and there's negotiation and flexing of power and everything. And one company wins, one company loses, one company gets cash faster than another, and one company has to wait for it. All those things, it might not in one transaction change the game, but those small little things can compound over time and it can hamper a company's growth or boost the company's growth, all
Mhm.
depending on. So that's how I think of accounts receivable and how that plays a part in this whole game. Maybe now you can talk about relationship between accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory.
Mhm.
It's, I think, easier to, for me personally, to visualize when I see it on a financial statement. Obviously, we're on a podcast, so it's maybe a
Right.
little bit harder.
Right.
But what would be your best, what would be your best hack at trying to explain that whole relationship?
Probably the easiest way to think about it is the cycle of cash in and cash out. So let's say that you start with a pile of money and the cash going out would be the money that you're paying for materials and services. And in essence, you're paying that to Nike if you're Walmart to buy those shoes. So you have to take money out of your bank account and give that, in theory, you can give that to Nike to get the shoes. Now, depending on the process that it's done, you can either pay cash for the delivery or you can set up what's called in most cases the in the restaurant business like net 30 days or net 45 days. And what that means is the Nike would deliver me the shoes and then I would pay Nike in 30 days or 45 days or 60 days or whatever the term is. And that's now the accounts payable. So that's the money that I owe to Nike in 30 days for the shoes that I have bought them. So then that once I receive the shoes and I sell them, I get cash into my account and then I can pay my accounts payable. Now, depending on how the whole system works, if you have sales and accounts receivable, that's money that they owe you back. So let's say you sell some sort of service, whether it's a SaaS or something where maybe they pay you, maybe they pay you, the customer pays you in a net 30 days or a net 45 days or whatever, then that's money that's owed to you. And that's still all part of the cycle. So I've taken money and cash coming out of my account. And now I'm waiting for money to come back into my account. And that could either be through sales of the shoes, or it could be from accounts receivable from a service that I sold to somebody. You know, let's say they bought shoes from me and I gave them 45 days to pay me back for the shoes. Then the accounts receivable would actually be the money coming back into my account. So that all starts at the back top of the pile. Now, yeah, like you said, it's kind of hard to visualize. I have this cool little graphic that we made that I will share in the show notes so people can visualize this when they're looking at it because it helps understand it. But the importance of this is really the amount of Andrew said very eloquently that cash is king, really moves the mountains. And without it, companies can't exist. And so it's not just about buying the things they need to sell, but they also need to pay dividends, reinvest in the business, pay employees, all those fun things. And that all comes from cash. And so this cycle is very important. Now, some businesses is a bigger deal than others. Walmart, Costco, Amazon is a big deal. Netflix, it's a big deal. But other ones, maybe like a Microsoft, maybe not as big a deal. So, or a Google, not as big a deal, but it is important to understand kind of the whole process and whatnot. Do we want to talk briefly about the formula? Formulas go over like a lead balloon on podcasts, but maybe we could at least clue them in on what we're talking about here.
There's 3, right? Let's do one for now, and then at some point we have to talk about cost of goods sold too. So
Right.
maybe like days sales outstanding. accounts receivable over revenue times 365.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
What it really means is how much accounts receivable do you have on your balance sheet compared to the revenue that you're generating, and how quickly are you turning that into cash? There's three components to this whole formula, and each one of them really represents how quickly are you turning over money held or bought into cash. And that's really the easiest way to think of it. You could get mired in the gobbledygook of the accounting and whatnot, but really what you really want to understand is how quickly are they turning inventory into sales? How quickly are they turning accounts receivable into revenue? All those kinds of things, accounts payable, how quickly they turn that over. That's really what this is telling you.
Yeah, because to dig into that a little bit. So to use the example of Dave buys Nikes from Nike and then he resells the Nikes to me and then I sell them at my lemonade stand. Bracelets too for half off if you buy a pair of Nikes from me. When Dave sells me my pair of shoes and maybe we're on the net 45 or something, I have 45 days to pay Dave back for the Nikes. As soon as I sign that contract to say I'm buying your Nikes, he books revenue on it. Now, what it does is it books accounts receivable and revenue on Dave's balance sheet. Once I give him the cash, that accounts receivable converts to cash. So in 45 days, that accounts receivable converts to cash. Now let's say Dave's reselling Nikes, not just to me, but all of his neighbors and all of my neighbors. And so he has lots of different accounts receivable. When you compare all of his accounts receivable with all of his revenue, it's telling you how many people in essence, whatever, I'm approximating, so bear with me. All the money that's owed to him versus how much revenue he's booked. When you plug it into that formula, it tells you how long it's taking for his customers to pay him for the Nikes. And what I've noticed, and there's one good example of this was Under Armour. And I can't remember which book this was in, but one of the accounting books that kind of goes in depth to this kind of stuff and talks about days sales outstanding. Under Armour was a good example where days sales outstanding kept it might have been days inventory outstanding. One of these three formulas that we're talking about.
Not going to hold your feet to the fire. It's the concept, not the specifics.
Yeah, good. That's what we're all about, right? So as that number changes over time, the accounts receivable versus the revenue, or if we're talking about inventory, as that expands, that can signal trouble. And then it could be preluding to, Under Armour was struggling to sell its inventory. Or in the case of Under Armour, maybe the retailers that they're selling through to are not ordering as much and they don't kind of prioritize them on accounts receivable. Those kinds of things. And so you will see, I don't think it's much. I don't look at it too closely in general, but you might see it move a couple days here or there, depending on the quarter, depending on the year. But if you start to see a trend in days sales outstanding, that's you usually consider a red flag. If it's trending in the wrong direction, and in this case, expanding, then that could be an issue because for whatever reason, they're having trouble collecting on the inventory that they've sold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a great example. What Target went through, do you think something like this would show up in their financials as far as the inventory issues that they had a year ago, 2 years ago? Like when the inventory started climbing, would that be an indication that maybe they're struggling to convert that into cash and that can affect the cash flow of the business?
Yeah, let's talk about the inventory outstanding because we kind of glossed over that. So similar formula, but in this case, looking at inventory versus cost of goods sold. Again, hard to visualize, but revenue and cost of goods sold happen when a sale is made. In the same way that accounts receivable is comparing to revenue, which is comparing basically when are you receiving the cash versus when did you make the sale. Inventory is how much inventory is on your books versus the the cost it costs you to sell the inventory. So similar type of ratio. Do you want to talk about cost of goods sold? Because we haven't talked about that one yet.
Yeah, sure. So cost of goods sold is a super exciting term that tells you how much their revenue costs the business in essence. It could be a catch-all for things like materials, the production of said sale of thing, including the people that go into all this. So it's all wrapped up in how much it costs Nike to produce their shoes. So from the plastics, from the fabric, from the people designing them, to the people producing them, to the people driving it from the store, from their place to the store, all of those are parts of the cost of goods sold. And usually that gets compared to revenue, and that's part of the gross margin of the business. And that really tells you how effectively a company manages its cost versus its revenues. And that's really where things like pricing power and stuff like that can really come into. But when you compare the cost of goods sold to inventory, that can really tell you, okay, how much does it cost the business to produce this thing that they're selling? And when they're buying stuff, then that they correlate with each other. And that's why you want to see how quickly they can turn the inventory compared to their cost, because that's cash that's already tied up, because they spent the money to build it or to make it, and now they want to see they want to see return on their investment. And that's, so when you see something like cost of goods sold, that's really what that means. It's a line item you'll see on the income statement, but here we're relating it to a balance sheet item. That's how these two line items will connect through the financial statements. And so that's what we're looking at.
So both of these, days inventory outstanding and days sales outstanding, you want a lower number better in general.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Yeah. The lower the better. FinChat actually does break out all three of these, so you can see the numbers. If you want to, homework after you're done listening to this, if you want to actually go play with companies and see how this works, FinChat actually does break it out, and that you can see each one. And yeah, the lower the better, because that means you're turning it faster and you're turning that money into cash quicker, and that's what you want.
So examples of days inventory outstanding increasing could be things like,
Um, it could be a myriad of things. It could be that they are having trouble collecting money from the people that owe them. It could also be that the revenues are falling. And so if you have kind of a correlation of that, let's say that you have a 30-day net with somebody with a big account, and they're 45 days behind paying you, that now has risen the accounts receivable number, which means you are not receiving cash, and your revenue is also dropping because you're not selling as much. And that could mean that starts to rise. As you said before, that's not a great sign. It could be a problem with one of your main accounts. It could be that maybe you have a new CFO and they're not doing a good job of collecting money. Knocking on doors and say, hey, hey, Bill, do please money, those kinds of things. Or it could also be an operational issue where you're seeing a slide in revenues kind of thing. And that could be a problem too. Either one of those equations, that's, I think, typically what you see when you see that kind of thing happen.
I mean, you could get maybe as into the weeds as you want on some of this stuff. And obviously, it'll depend on the industry. But if we're investors in Dave's Nike business, and we notice that guys like Andrew and his neighbors are having trouble with the accounts receivable, does that maybe signal that demand for Nikes or demand for shoes is at the customer level is reducing, right? And then could that will that maybe not show up in revenue yet, but show up in accounts receivable, and vice versa? So yeah, I think that could be very interesting if you can kind of like spot those. I've never been able to do anything like that, but
No.
it's kind of cool to know that that's a potential tool that could be something that would be useful for people who get really deep into the accounting of things.
Yeah, for sure.
To help you grow as an investor, I'd say probably our free ebook and email series at stockmarketpdf.com.
Just kind of thinking out loud. But I would think that if you went back and looked during the pandemic era, you could probably see some of those analyzing different companies. You could probably see some of those numbers adjust or change depending on the industry. If you look at the airline industry or any sort of travel industry thing, you probably would have seen maybe swings in some of those that were not normal for the businesses. Boeing's maybe not a great example, but if you look at American Airlines or United, maybe, or Northwest, I'm sorry, that's dating myself, Delta, you might have seen some swings in some of those just because there were changes in the customer behavior. Maybe they were struggling to pay because they weren't getting revenue. So, I mean, it can be a cascading chain, and something you can see probably in tougher economic times, because down the food chain, maybe people are struggling to pay them, and then they're struggling to pay you, and just kind of feeds back into the loop. I would imagine if you probably did studies on that, again, homework, if you want to, you could probably see something along those lines, and that would be interesting. But yeah, anytime you see any of these numbers rise substantially over a period of time, that's certainly red flags.
Yeah. Speaking of homework, there's a book called Financial Shenanigans.
Oh yeah.
And he goes into some of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
super thrilling, super
Yeah.
thrilling.
Super thrilling.
Highly recommend.
Yeah. But it is fascinating. It's yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to read, and these are some of the ways that sometimes companies can use to manipulate things that maybe the unsuspecting investor may not be aware of. So it is something to pay attention to. I guess, like, if you were analyzing a company like Walmart, Costco, or Amazon, those are like the three big box companies that always come to, would this be part of something you might look at to give you a sense of like how quickly they're turning their stuff to see what their cash flow potential could be?
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about off air, it's something that's a tool that I've got in my toolkit that mostly collects dust.
Yeah.
And it's not me trying to say that it's a unuseful kind of tool, just to say that I have other tools in my toolkit that are maybe a little more long-term focused. But again, that's not to disrespect these formulas or any tool like this, or even to say I could be wrong, because there could be a situation where it very clearly shows up in days sales outstanding and I miss it. But obviously I'm betting on that not happening. What about you?
It's pretty dusty in my toolbox too. It is something I know, and in particular, I have seen people talk about it related to Amazon, and for good or bad, when the company has struggled with cash flow conversion or cash flow, I've seen people talk about some of these formulas related to that, like trying to explain maybe why Amazon is struggling to generate cash flow, and it could come back to some of these components, and that's what they've used to kind of analyze it. And so it's something I will look at, but I don't dive into the nitty gritty of it. I frankly would just look at it through FinChat and see, okay, is this normal for them? And if it is, then okay, just move on. One thing I will say about it is, I'll give you two examples. One is Amazon actually has a negative cash conversion cycle, which means that they collect money before they owe it to anybody, which is an amazing place to be. Costco, theirs is hovering around a 1.5 to 2, somewhere in that range over the last few years. And that's awesome as well, which basically what that means is for every 2 days, they turn over their cash. So if the cycle goes over 2 times in 2 days. The thing that's stark about this, and this is what it kind of comes back to reputation a little bit, Amazon has a reputation for being very, very tough on its vendors. And because it's a big company and they can move a lot of product, they are able to negotiate terms that are more favorable to Amazon than to the people that they're buying from. Whereas Costco has a reputation of being stakeholder friendly, which means that they're favorable to not only their customers but also the people that they work with as well. And so that, to me, when I see those numbers, that really illustrates kind of the mentality difference on how Amazon treats everybody versus how Costco treats everybody. I'm not saying that one is better as investment or the other. It's just there's different mindsets. And so that's something that I have taken away from kind of looking at this in the past, and just something, the little tidbit I wanted to throw out there people could think about.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of an application
Mhm.
of this formula. I don't know if we actually said the formula itself, but it's the 3 ratios: days inventory, days sales, days payable. And
Mhm.
you basically add inventory and sales and subtract the payable. That is a very, very perfect way to illustrate that, actually, of what the whole cash conversion cycle does and kind of some of the things it can signal to investors in the market and some of the things it can say about a business and the way, like you said, that they treat vendors and customers and all of that. So yeah.
Yep. 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 See, accounting can be fun, right?
Well, any conversation with Costco in it is always fun,
Right. It's going to be a win-win for everybody.
obviously.
So how does a hot dog fit into all this? That's what I want to know.
Right. Did you hear they're switching to Coke?
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Really? From
Yeah.
Pepsi to Coke?
They are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. They've finally seen the light.
You should go reserve a seat. Just say, this is my seat. Every day, lunchtime, I'm sitting here with my Diet Coke and my Costco hot dog.
So I have an admission to make. I have never had their hot dog and soda
What?
deal
What?
ever.
What?
I know. It's just wrong. Every time my wife and I go there, we walk by and there's like this huge line. There's probably more people in the, dining area than there is actually shopping, which is saying something. And I always think to myself, I really should get a hot dog and a soda, and I never do.
Man.
So
Are you not like a hot dog guy?
uh you know, when I was a kid, I was way into hot dogs, but as I've gotten older, I think I've only had 2 hot dogs in the last, I don't know, 5 years, and both of those were from Portillo's in Chicago. So, yeah, I guess
What?
I guess I'm not a big hot dog guy.
Remind me not to take you to the Durham Bulls hot dog day.
We go to a baseball game. That's a whole other story. I had plenty of Dodger dogs when I lived in LA, so plenty of Dodger dogs.
Good.
So hopefully I made up for it.
You did.
All right.
That is the show for today. We hope you found it helpful, hopefully slightly educational. You can reach out to us at newsletter@einvestingforbeginners.com. Send us your questions. We love answering those on the air. Connect, learn, and grow with Value Spotlight. Peace.